Okay, so this one is pretty much a basic watercolor tutorial. So if you haven't done any watercoloring before, this is probably a really great place to start. So we're going to be stamping with waterproof ink. Here at Stampin'Up we have StazOn ink, which is our waterproof one. It's solvent ink, so it's not the same as our other classic inks, which are water-based. This is a solvent ink pad, and therefore it's waterproof, which means that when you add water to it, like we're going to do with our watercolors, it won't run or bleed. So that's actually a really great thing to have. If you're planning on doing some watercoloring and you're wanting to watercolor images, then this is a go-to ink pad that has that waterproof capability. So I'm going to be using the Blessings of Home stamp set today, which has got this beautiful, beautiful big image here, which is gorgeous. And you can see I've created this card with it, and we're basically going to recreate that. So let's just pop that to one side. I've got all the pieces here to make it. It's a very simple card, but we're focusing mostly on the colouring of the images. That's where I'm going to spend the most of my time. This is exactly half of a sheet of our Fluid 100 paper. So this is the Fluid 100 paper. As you can see, this is half a sheet. So this is, in fact, it's slightly less than half because I've measured it a little thinner so it would fit nicely on my card. It's just over about 8.2 centimeters wide, with a little bit less than half, but it is the full width of the paper. Okay, so that's the measurement. That'll all be in the PDF for you anyway. All the measurements will be there, so I'm not too focused on the measurements at the moment. All right, so it's called Blessings of Home. You can see I've already taken out the ones that I'm going to be using. Pop that to one side. I've got my lovely big beautiful stamp here, and I'm going to ink this up with StazOn. The good thing about StazOn is, like I said, it's waterproof, but one thing you need to be mindful of is that it will actually stamp, because it stays on. That's why it's called StazOn, because it stays on whatever you put it on, and that includes your rubber stamps. So if you're using it on a rubber stamp, you'll need to use our specific StazOn cleaner. You can get it mostly clean if you clean it straight away with your regular Stampin' Mist cleaner. However, just going to pop this here, turn it slightly on the side. I'm leaving a space at the top for my sentiment, as you can see here. Okay, and I'm just making sure I get good. And you can see it's not too dark, okay, because the ink, my ink pad is not really inked up highly, and I actually prefer that. If I ink it up a lot, if I need it for to get a really black image, I would add some re-inker to this, but then it might almost be too dark for my colouring. If this was very black, this would look maybe a little bit too much stark contrast, because I want this to be a soft card. So having a slightly less inked ink pad is advantageous. If you're worried that your ink pad is too inky and it's going to give you too much of a black result, stamp it off on the base on your scrap paper underneath first, and then stamp it, like second generation stamping on here, so it's not too dark. But I'm actually quite happy with that. All right, so I've got some colors here. These are the colors I've chosen. I'm going with the same colors that I used here. I've got Highland Heather and Gorgeous Grape. Those are down here in these these little flowers. I've got So Saffron and Daffodil Delight, which are the two, oops, that's not right. So Saffron and Daffodil Delight, which you can see I've got like two different tones here in my main big flowers. And then I've also got Soft Succulent for the leaves, and Calypso Coral up here for some of these little roses and flowers at the top. Okay, also use the Calypso Coral in the center. So we're going to do that. We're going to ink up a couple of blocks, and I'm going to start with the big flowers. So let's go with So Saffron and Daffodil Delight. It's not, if you've only got one yellow, that's fine. You can certainly use more of one color and darken it up by not, dilute it to make it lighter and so forth. But if you have got two colors, two different yellows to work as, contrast and a bit of shading, you'll find that's a little easier to work with. Now you can use your medium tip, or you can use your fine tip. Like I said in my earlier video, I actually prefer, for the most part, I do prefer the fine tip. I find that's the easiest to work with. So I'm going to start with the lighter color, which is the So Saffron, and I'm going to add a bit of water to my block and sort of turn that into a nice little watercolor whooshy, smushy bit there, and I'm just going to start painting my petals. Okay, now like I said, I'm starting with the big flower. There is a little bit of shading in here, and that's where I'm going to add the shady bits here in towards the center is where I'm going to add my brighter yellow. Okay, so I'm starting with just all over. Now, here's the good thing about watercolor. You don't have to be really precise, okay? You can see I'm being quite quick with this, going out sort of towards the edges. And if I miss a little bit, some white spots, that's actually a good thing because that adds life and energy to your watercolor, right? And I'm just going to keep going. And I'm kind of using mostly the tip, but also a little bit of the side of the brush just to get the color all over those petals, all right? Happy with that. All right, I'm going to do this one as well and the same. So this other big flower here is going to have the same color. You can have whatever colors you like. If you don't have these colors, you can make your flowers any flowery colors because flowers can be any color, right? So we like that. We like that we can change it up to suit what you've got. So, you know, work with what you have, don't worry about don't worry about my colors if those are not colors you want. Now I'm going to go in with the darker yellow. The Daffodil Delight is the darker. I'm going in where this shaded area is here, closer to the center of the flower. And you can see I'm just kind of being really rough with it. And that's kind of the fun of watercolor. You can be rough, okay? You don't have to be precise or really gentle or careful because it's actually that little bit of rough coloring that's actually going to add a bit of energy to your flowers. All right, I'm happy with those. They look great. All right, so let's get these two cleaned up. I've got some paper towel here. You can clean your blocks however you normally do, whether you're using a mist or whatever, but I'm just going to clean mine up just with a bit of paper towel. And also having paper towel is handy for this point. So you can see I've got yellow all over this. If I squeeze a bit of water through and run it off on my paper towel, because the paper towel is really absorbent, it gets the rest of the yellow off that, and I no longer have any yellow on the brush. So really handy to have some paper towel close by. That will always give you a good result. All right, let's go with our purple flowers down the bottom here. So we've got our Highland Heather. You can start with the dark color, you can start with the light color. I usually start with the light, and that's actually, I'm using more of the light than I am of the dark. So the bigger block I'm going to use with the light, and the smaller block I'm going to use with the dark. You can see it's quite a bit darker. See how it's a lot different. All right, so let's start with the lighter one and smush that around with a couple of drops of water. So now it's kind of saturated the end of my brush, and I'm just going to go in and color my petals down here. And once again, being really, really rough and not particularly careful, just using the very tip of my brush to go over. So the good thing you'll notice about the Stays On ink, it doesn't run or bleed at all, which means you haven't got to worry about, I mean, you kind of stay roughly in the lines, but you haven't got to worry about it bleeding or going anywhere you don't want it to. So I love that about Stays On ink. It's perfect for watercoloring. And if you're planning on watercoloring, definitely want to make sure you've got some of that because you'll need waterproof ink. All right. All right, happy with that. Now I'm going to go into the darker color, and because it's a lot darker, I'm actually going to run a little bit off here and dilute it down a little bit. Whoops. And I just want to kind of add a little bit here in the middle. And because our flowers, the petals of our flowers are still wet, it's going to run a little bit, and don't worry about that. It's kind of going to add some interest to your little flowers here. All right, looking nice. Love, love, love that. All right, let's clean that little bit off. That's all the purple we have on here. That's if you're following what I'm doing. If you're doing different colors, obviously, you're just going to substitute with your stuff. So squeeze a bit of water through until the brush comes clear. And that's a great way to keep your brush clean and ready for the next color. All right. So the next one we're going to do is the Calypso Coral. I'm only using the one color here. And I only need a small block. All right, so we're going to go in a drop or so, smush it around, make it all wet, and start to colour with that. just gonna, and the good thing is the stays on, you can still see the shading even after you've coloured over it, so it makes it easier to go back and add darker colour in those shaded areas if you want to. You won't have any trouble seeing the stays on ink lines. This is much, much easier than, say, pencil colouring, where you're really trying to be careful and stay inside the lines and get all the bits coloured in. You don't have to worry so much with this. This is very forgiving, and we love that. I think a lot of people are scared to watercolour because they're worried that they won't be precise enough, and the good news is you don't have to be. All right, so I'm actually going to add a bit more to that, because I want to go back in and get a bit of more solid colour. So I'm adding some darker colour to those shaded bits. Just with the very tip of your brush, that's going to give you all the bits you need. Okay, it's looking nice. You can use the same colour in the centre if you want to, or we could come in there with some yellow. And I didn't do that on these ones. I just did all the one Calypso Coral, but I'm going to add some Calypso Coral into the centre of these flowers, and I'm actually thinking I might add some yellow into the middle of a couple of these up the top, which I think might add a little bit more contrast up there. And I'm kind of just dabbling my pen, the end of my pen over this, and I'm not even going to go all the way to the edges. I'm leaving some white around it because it's a bit more contrast. And then let's get our paper towel back in. And I'm going to go with the daffodil. And I've got a little bit here on here. Or I could use another. I'm not even going to worry about a block because I'm not using very much. That's just to add a little bit more colour up the top there. It's not very noticeable, but all right. Okay, it's looking really nice. Isn't that pretty? Let me just clean these off on my paper towel. And I'm going to use some soft succulent for my leaves. You could also use mint macaron. On my original, I originally did mint macaron and then put a bit of soft succulent over the top. If you look really, really closely, there is actually a little bit of mint macaron towards the edges of those leaves, but I think the soft succulent is great just as it is. So I'm adding a tiny bit of water to this, and we're going to start colouring. And once again, you don't have to do the whole thing. You can leave a little bit of white, and that kind of gives it a bit more energy. That's the thing with watercolouring. If you look at a good watercolour that you see on, in a picture or something like that, you may not have noticed before, but there'll be a lot of white space left. And basically your eye fills in all those white spaces and the bits with what your brain knows is there. And that's actually why watercolours have that gorgeous effect, that charm, because it actually is allowing you to fill in the blanks with your brain. So don't feel like you have to colour everything. Leave some work for your viewer to do for their brain. Give me a second. All right, so I feel like we've done all those little bits, but I'd like a couple of, missed some leaves up at the top here. That's looking really good though. Let's not add some water this time and get a little bit more darker colour here. Can you see that? When you don't add water, you get that darker colour. And that's going to give us a bit more contrast as well. Some darker green here and there. Okay. It's looking really nice. What do you think, guys? Do we like this? So on my original, just going to wipe my block off. All right, on my original, you might notice it's yellow. Can you see the yellow bit around? Now, this is a little trick that I like to do a lot. I like to use a blending brush. If you don't have our beautiful blending brushes, these are just the bomb. I love them. I use them all the time. I'm going into the So Saffron, and I'm just going to make sure that I have got the ink off the edges, and then I'm going to come in and go over the corners of my creation here. Now, if you do have any little blobs or any bits of, like I had a little tiny mark down the bottom here, this is going to help to hide a lot of that. And you'll find it's a great way of forgiving a few sins. I'm going almost up to the edges of my watercolored image, but I'm leaving kind of a little tiny bit, so it's almost like a halo of light around it. I'm not going quite all the way to the edge. I'm just going almost to the edge. Let's have a look and see how this is looking. I think it looks really, really nice. You can see that beautiful yellow background, right? And you've got a little bit of a white halo around this whole image here. The last thing I did was I stamped my Calypso Coral. You could use any of the colors that we've used here, but I used this is from the same stamp set called Thank You. It says, "Thank you for inspiring me," which I think is really nice. And I'm going to, whoops, I need to bring my head in for a second. I'm sorry, guys. So I get that straight. It's always best to get right over something if you need to get it straight, okay? And there we go. We have our "Thank you for inspiring me." And then we can put our card together. So simple, all right? So let's start by putting the basic white piece here. And I'm just going to use a bone folder. And then I have a soft succulent piece. And this is a piece of, oh, I've got to remember the name of the paper to tell you what it is. Quickly look it up. It's right up here near the front. Where is it? Here it is. Okay, so the paper is called Lovely and Linen. Okay, it's this one here. And I'm using this little soft succulent and white dots on the soft succulent piece. And it's part of this Lovely and Linen bundle, but you can just get the stamp, the DSP by itself. It's really pretty. This is it. And I'm just going to pop it straight onto my soft succulent piece here. I have measured this so it just fits inside, and all the measurements will be in the PDF for you. All right, let's, like so. And then this piece goes onto our white card base. Almost to the end of this seal. Okay, let's pop that on there. Go that way. All right, so then this piece is going to go in the middle, and we don't have to have an extra sentiment piece because I've already got my sentiment on here. You can stick it straight down, but I really like it on dimensionals, so I think that looks really nice. So one in each corner. And I like one along the long side. If it's a long way, I don't want it to sag in the middle, so I'll put one halfway along that long side as well. Because no one likes the sag, right? We don't like that. All right, so then this gets positioned right here in the middle, and our card is done. Now, if you wanted to, one thing you could do is you could use your Wink of Stella, and you could add a bit of a touch of Wink of Stella once it's dry into the center of some of the flowers. I always like Wink of Stella thrown on top of something. It just adds that little bit of sparkle and looks so nice. So, all right, I think that looks good. What do you think? So now I have two beautiful cards. You can see this one I added a little bit more Calypso Coral, and in fact the overall effect on this one is darker than this. Which one do you like best? Do you like the soft and subtle one, or do you like the darker one? I'm not sure. All right, guys, I'll get ready for my next card. This is just basic watercoloring using StazOn to create your image, and then and coloring it. So I hope that's been helpful for someone and that you've enjoyed watching me do that today. And I'll get set up for the next one.